And with that, we will show you Codux today. Jonathan is joining me here on stage. We'll be doing a live demo. And before we start, we'll talk a little bit about ourselves. So my name is Tom, Jonathan joining me. We are both longtime Wixers, been with the company for quite a while. I lead developer relations for Codux, and Jonathan is the VP of R&D for our group. Moving on. Now, we're going to start with a little bit of a story, right? How we get our work done. Usually, as developers, when we start to work on a website, on an application, on a component, it usually starts off on the product side, right? We'll have a product manager that kind of defines the scope of this component, the behaviors that are kind of to be expected, and what it's actually supposed to do. On screen, you can see an example for an accordion component, right? A mock, a sketch for it. This one's in Balsamic. And that gets handed over to our design. UX is then responsible for kind of nailing down the exact behaviors, the interactions, how things actually will work. And once that's been done, it gets passed over to us developers. It is our responsibility to make it real, to make it happen. And so what we usually get is some sort of visual output, something like this, some sort of design that represents what we want to make. And it's our responsibility to create it, to make it real, to make it happen. And we do that using textual means, through code. We write code to create a visual output. We think there's a little bit of a disconnect there, and we'll be talking more about that later on. Now, once we've kind of started to get our work done, and we want to make that component, we want to make it happen, well, we need to first of all understand what we're playing with. What's the playing field? Finding our feet and understanding code can be a complex task. Which conventions does it use? Which visual output is related to which piece of code? Which piece of code is related to which visual output? And so I commonly find myself doing something like applying a border of 3 pixels solid red to something just so I can orient myself on the screen and understand what it is that I'm actually looking at. And even if I've done that, I'm sure some of you might recognize these screenshots from many Twitter discussions about project structure, right? I mean, some structures use routes and pages, others use components and containers. There are many different options, and every time we interact with a new project, we find ourselves, again, having to understand sort of the customs and rituals of that team, of that project. Okay. Once we've kind of got our bearing and we understand what it is that we want to make, well, now it's a question of how do we actually do it. And not everything is as straightforward as it can be. We often find ourselves kind of having to go and use various third-party tooling just to nail down specific behaviors or specific designs that we'd like to implement. You can see an example, 2 examples on screen. The first is for a gradient generator. The second is for a box shadow generator. Both use multiple parameters and have a lot of play to them. You can shape them into many different ways. And so we work in those tools, and then it's up to us to kind of take that output and include it back into our code, integrate it back into our components. Okay, we've done that. We've created the thing. But is it perfect? Does it do everything it should? Well, that's an open question, right? On screen, you can see an example for the Android screen size fragmentation. This one's from around 2015. And if you're making a design or a component or an application, you want to make sure that it looks right in all of those different situations. There are so many cases that can be that can occur. And if we only look sort of at the happy path of things, it's really easy to miss out on edge cases and on things that might be problematic down the road. Even if we've done that and we've created a thing, we've created a component, we've created some sort of API, we find ourselves having to document our work in various ways just so that other stakeholders, other members of our team can understand what it is and can consume it. 3 examples on stage. You can see on the left side, Airbnb's visualization library. So you create a vast set of demos, of examples, kind of to illustrate what's the potential there, right? What can you actually do with this thing, with this component? Or maybe we create various API documentations. so that other developers will know sort of what's the contract with this component, how can they actually utilize it, what can they do, and how they are expected to do it. And in some edge cases, we even find ourselves implementing various playgrounds within our projects. This is the Chakra playground, wonderful component library, but it really gives you the ability to kind of play around with things in a sort of isolated environment just to understand the potential that is there. If we're to take these 3 steps, right, and kind of put them, put titles on them, we talk about understanding, effectiveness, and confirmation. So we want to understand what we're doing and where we're doing it. We want to be as effective as possible, moving as fast as we can and iterating, getting the results that we want. And at the end of the day, be sure that the results are what we were looking for and the output that we wanted. Okay, so with all of those, with all of those in mind, I am very happy to introduce you all to Codux. Codux is a brand new offering from Wix, completely standalone from any of the existing products or offerings you might have heard of before. It is a visual IDE for React projects. It lets you work visually and to see the changes in real time. It lets you work on your components in isolation. You can set up the environment for each component to be as complex as you need it to be, or as simple as the case requires. And it's really important for us to state that code is the only source of truth that matters, right? Product managers may have done a lot of work and a lot of effort in creating the specs for the component and for the behaviors that they want. The designers have worked really hard on nailing down the aesthetics and making sure that it looks right. But at the end of the day, the thing that actually reaches users, the things that they see on their screen, is what is implemented through the code. And we said that Codux is a visual IDE, but it's important to stress that it's not a replacement for your IDE. We fully understand that developers are really tied to the tools that they chose. They've customized them to their liking. I know I have. And we're not expecting you to replace any of that. You can think of Codux kind of like a super-powered sidekick that you call on for specific tasks, mostly tasks that have to do with visual outputs and with visual work. In terms of supported stack, it's based React and TypeScript, kind of our bread and butter and the technologies that we support out of the box. In terms of styling solutions, CSS, Sass, the modules variants of both of those, Tailwind, Stylable, which is our own open source styling preprocessor, and of course also includes an integration for Git if you want to use it. If not, you can stick to your IDE or your terminal or however you are used to doing it. Okay, so with that, it's time to jump into a live demo, take it for a spin, and show you what it can really do. Our task for today is to take this dashboard for Cloud Cache, a completely fictional, made-up company that we invented for the sake of this demo, and we want to spice up this dashboard just a little bit, right? We want to, instead of having this sort of flat design, we want to add this credit card component center stage so that it has this nice visual to draw your attention to it. With that, let us move over to Codux. When you open it, this is the first thing that you'll actually see. This is what we call the project picker. And it allows you to do several different things. The first of which is to create a brand new project. You can do so either using one of our blank templates, supported by various technologies, Webpack, Vite, and so on. Thanks, Evan. Probably not around, but still, thank you so much for Vite. Or one of our quick templates, right? So if you want something with a little bit more substance, something that you can kind of start playing off of and understanding what are the possibilities, we have a couple of templates to start from there as well. But you can also just open one of your existing local projects. It supports React and TypeScript, just ordinary code projects, nothing special. Or you can clone a brand new one from Git. Bring one of your projects over and open it using Codux. For the sake of today's demo, we already have our project kind of set up, the Cloud Cache demo, and so we'll jump over into that. Before we actually take a look at Codux, we'll jump for a second over to VS Code. This is just to show you that this is an ordinary project, right? It uses React, it uses TypeScript, it uses Vite, nothing special about it in that regard. The only thing that we're really adding here is one dev dependency called React Board, And this is what allows you to kind of set up the component fixtures so that Codux will automatically pick them up and render them on stage. Beyond that, it's just an application. JSX, React, anything you might expect to find in an ordinary project. For a styling solution, this one uses the SAS models to achieve its designs and its looks. And I think that's about it in terms of that. OK, moved back over to Codux. Once you've jumped into a project, this is the first screen that you'll actually see. And here you can see what we call boards. Boards serve as isolated instances where you can render your components visually in different states, in different permutations, so that you can check and see how they behave in various cases. On the left side, you'll see the ability that Codux has automatically detected various components in our project, and we can filter our boards based on that. To accomplish our design, we're going to jump straight into our application. And here, once we've dove into a board, we can see our component rendered center stage on what we call actually the stage. And this allows you to interact with the component. You can kind of see all the hover effects moving and working just like you would in the browser. Nothing special there. However, if you move over to select mode, now things start to get a little bit interesting. You're able to actually select components on stage and drill into subcomponents and subcomponents, selecting components or elements as deep as you want. And as you do, you'll notice that the built-in code editor at the bottom will follow you around and show you the relevant file for the relevant selection. Another thing that happens is that on the left side of the screen, you can see the Elements panel. The Elements panel shows you all of the various components and elements that exist within this project, and it does so by creating a hybrid of your source code, the rendered output, and all of the insights it could gather from that. So things like conditionals, expressions, repeaters will be highlighted and shown to you on screen so that you can sort of understand how they interact and play with each other. OK, I think it's time to actually start to get some work done. And so our first step will be to create a brand new component. We're going to click New Component. We're going to name it Card Balance, since that's kind of a good descriptor for it. And now we have a brand new component. Once we've created one, it automatically created the component, the style sheet for that component, and a board that renders it. Let's start adding some things and spice it up. Now we've opened the Add panel. This will show us all of the various HTML elements that we have available for us, just so we can kind of drag and drop them quickly, letting us add various elements. It'll also detect any local components that we have available in our project, so we could add those just as easily. OK, so the first thing we want to do is we'll add an H4 here, just to have that title. We'll drag that text node over into it. We'll rename it to card as the design called for. OK. Next up, we'll add another div as a sibling to our H4. And we'll add the two local components that we're actually using in this case. So we're going to have a credit card, and we're going to have our balance. Now, as you can see, there's an error on stage, but that's OK. That error is to be expected. The reason for it is that we've added components that expect mandatory required properties, but those have not been given to them. Codux was able to isolate that error and to kind of encapsulate it, keeping us safe, but still exposing it back to us. Because we want this component to be reusable, we want to declare the interface and accept these types through our props. Another handy feature that Codux exposes here is the ability to jump to the direct relevant place within the code, either the built-in one or in VS Code. So we've done that, and that took us directly to the right spot. Let's start defining the interface for this thing. So we'll take the types out of our credit card component, and from our finance, define those two properties, CCInfo and finances. Looking good. And destructure them from our properties, just so they'll be available to bind to the components within, and pass them on. CCInfo for our credit card, and our finances for the balance component. Okay, looks great. We'll jump back to Codux. The output hasn't changed, right? We've defined the interface for this. We've created the bindings, but we haven't actually passed any real values into them. So now that's where our boards come into play. They let you define the properties and to set the values that you want to see rendered in each specific case. On the right side, you can see what we call the property panel. This automatically picks up the types of your component and provides you with visual controllers so that you can kind of tweak them and set them to your likings. So we've kind of set both of those, and we'll dive into them to actually set the value. We'll start off by setting our logo to RenderATL. Got to stay on brand. We'll give it a name, Jane Smith. A couple of numbers, because undefined is not really a valid credit card number. Expiration date, and that looks good. We'll jump back, move over to our finance, do the exact same thing here, but for the properties that it requires, and that's already starting to look pretty good. Nice. But the design isn't quite right. I mean, we were asked for a different layout, and so we'll start fixing that. The way we do that is we drill in, and we'll select our div and move over to our style panel. The style panel lets us actually engage with the style and the design of this component. So you can see visual controllers that represent the various styling properties and declarations that we can set for these elements. Essentially, it writes Sass code, it writes CSS, but exposes it through a slightly different layout. So we need to add a class. We'll call it card and balance, just so that we can design this specific div. And we'll start applying what we need to it. So first up, we'll set flex. Jonathan, I think our nodes are not nested correctly, the credit card and balance. Thank you, and as you can see, it's as easy to kind of move those around into the right place. And we have our credit card and our balance kind of side by side as we wanted. Nice. Now, the balance component is obviously not kind of doing its thing correctly, and so we'll start saying that. But before we do that, we'll set a bit of margin around our component just to give it a little bit of air, a little bit of breathing space as we move on. Okay, selecting our balance component now, we can start and style that. So it's already got flex, but we want it to be vertical. We'll open up the code just so that you can see kind of the changes as they happen. Setting it to vertical, we'll set our justify to space around. This would look better in our final result. And I think here it also calls for a bit of margin, but this time only on the left side to kind of space it out as our design required. We can unlock it so that we only work on a specific side of it. And here, instead of using a hard fixed value, you can see that Codux has also automatically detected and picked up various variables that it was able to find in our project. So we're using spacing 1.5 and setting that there. Last thing we'll do here would be to set a border on the left side kind of as a separator for these. We'll unlock it and set the color here also to a variable, color light. Nice. With that, the design of this component is pretty much what we've intended to do. Nice. Let's jump back into our app component. Now, as you can see, the design for the original balance component has already changed, right? We've edited that component and we've played with its style. So now we actually see the old component, but that's okay because we're just about to replace it. We'll reopen the add panel and we can see our brand new card balance component already available for us to use. We'll drag it over. We can add it through the elements tree or through the stage. It doesn't really matter. Remove the old one. And this error you're already familiar with, right? We have a component that requires a specific property, and here we're going to start to pass it through. In this scope, we have an object already available to us called user info that kind of has the relevant information for these components. And so all that's left to do is to bind it into our card balance component. And with that, I am quite happy to say that the demo has gone by successfully. But this isn't where the story ends, okay? We have a grand vision for what we feel Codux could actually be. We're starting off with a very strong focus for developers and for people who are working with React and TypeScript, but we see Codux serving as one source of truth for the entire project, bringing over additional stakeholders and giving them tools to work directly on the code, doing whatever changes and modifications they would like. We're starting off with React support. That's definitely our focus. But once we feel that that has reached maturity and is stable and provides good enough value for our users, we'll be looking at which frameworks to add next. And this is something we definitely would love to hear from you. Now, we're also working in the background on a zero setup used anywhere online environment that you could just jump in through using your browser and to actually get work done without having to set up an entire development environment, installing Node and Git and various toolings, just work in your browser. We said that we want more stakeholders to work on the project. Designers definitely top amongst that list. That process of working with a designer, back and forth, ping-ponging and iterating over and over because the button isn't quite where it's supposed to be and the shadows isn't quite what the designer wanted it to be. We want to give them the tools to make those changes for themselves, right? And after that, us as developers would only have to review them, make sure that they were applied to the right places and that they don't mess anything up within that project. Lastly, definitely a plugging system and a marketplace is high on our list to let anyone kind of expand on the capabilities of Codux and to add whatever they think is missing and to share it back with the community. With that, I invite you all to scan our QR code where you can download Codux, you can follow us on Twitter, you can join our Discord community, talk to other users, talk to us. This is completely free. We just went out for our public beta last Christmas, so it's all brand new and super exciting for us. We'd love to hear your feedback. That's our primary concern. We want to know, does it help you? Does it function? Does it do the work that you need? And if you think something could be better or something is missing, let us know. We'd really love to know. Thank you all so much for joining us today.